Mate 40 here. So who does it better, right? Religious people or secular people? Who has more sex? Who has better sex? So I've spent much of my life religious, but I've also spent much of my life in the secular world. These are some impressions that come to me. It certainly seems that secular people have more sexual partners. It also seems that more sexually adventurous, that, you know, it seems like they do more positions, try new things. It seems like religious people tend to put less importance on sex. All right, in religious circles, there's a constant, downplaying of the importance of sex compared to the obsessions of the secular. For secular people, I think sexuality is one of those rare places where they can reach for transcendence and mystery and magic. All right, a secular life tends to be fairly drained of those things.
Tucker Carlson, happy Monday. As we've often noted on this show, because it's hard not to notice, we are living in one of those moments where so much is happening all at once, and information about it all is so tightly controlled that huge history-changing events can occur, and in fact are occurring right now, and nobody seems aware of them. It's pretty unsettling, actually. Here's one example. Europe is descending into poverty. Did you know that? Had someone told you that? So the most advanced continent on the planet, the birthplace of Western civilization, our civilization, is getting much poorer very quickly. It's moving backward at high speed. Just a year ago, Europe was a modern place. For example, the overwhelming majority of Europeans heated their homes with natural gas, as modern people do. In Germany, the continent's richest country, only about 6% of households, most of them rural, heated with cordwood. And you'd expect that, given that, again, Germany is a modern industrialized country with central heating and indoor plumbing and all the other trappings of a society that has moved beyond the medieval period. Last year, only about 6% of Germans used wood to heat their homes, but that has changed dramatically. Demand for firewood in Germany has risen so fast that there is none left to buy. You can't get it. So desperate Germans are now cutting their own wood, scouring the forests like their ancestors for sources of heat. Watch.
Some in Germany are taking matters into their own hands with solutions that might look like a blast from the past. About 2 hours outside Berlin, residents of this small town have turned to wood chips for fuel. We have to be innovative, said the project's organizer. If we don't act and just rely on the government to solve the crisis, we'll never succeed. This burner will soon fuel most of this village of 60 people.
So they call it biomass, but it's wood. They're burning wood, again, as they did during the feudal period. That's Germany. In Poland, families are standing in line for days to buy coal. Not in 1910, right now, tonight. Cars queued up outside coal mines, hoping for fuel. Quote, "This is beyond imagination," one 57-year-old Polish man told Reuters. "People are sleeping in their cars. I remember the communist times, but it didn't cross my mind that we could return to something even worse." Oh, but it's come. Something even worse has arrived. The French government has announced energy rationing this winter. Just the other day, France had so much energy that it exported it to other countries. It was a net exporter of energy. Now, there won't be enough heat in France for everyone in the country to stay warm. In the UK, 70% of restaurants are preparing to close, to go under. Why? Because when winter comes, they won't be able to afford to keep the heat and lights on, et cetera, et cetera. This is happening across Europe in every country. So the question is, why is it happening? And the answer is extremely simple. There's an energy shortage in Europe. Cheap energy is essential. It is the key to everything that a normal society strives for. Prosperity, safety, a longer life expectancy for its citizens, everything depends on cheap energy, but Europe no longer has it. And as a result, things are falling apart very quickly. Energy costs in Europe are expected to increase by hundreds of percent in coming months. Germany's year-ahead price of electricity, that's the benchmark for all of Europe, it's measured in euros per megawatt hour, that price just exceeded 1,000 euros for the first time in history. For perspective, just a week ago, last Monday, the cost was about 700 euros per megawatt hour, and that was a record. In other words, the price rise is approaching 50% in a single week. In France, electricity went up 25% in one day. That was last Friday. Imagine that happening to you. Here's what Europe looks like tonight.
In Europe, it's lights out at major monuments and tourist attractions as a long, hot summer gives way to what officials worry could be a bitterly cold winter. Skyrocketing energy prices have put Europe on a war footing, with Russia as the enemy.
Nous sommes dans ce qu'on appelle une guerre hybride.
We're in what can be described as a hybrid war, said French President Emmanuel Macron. Russia uses energy resources, like it does food, as a war weapon to exert pressure. Oil prices have doubled, coal prices have quadrupled, and natural gas is now 7 times more expensive than early last year.
7 times more expensive. So it turns out if you don't have cheap natural gas, you can't run the continent. Now, if you've got a graduate degree and live in a city in the United States, you may be shocked to learn this. You may never have heard this before. You may have believed that fossil fuels were on their way out any day now. And you thought that because the Davos people and our own leaders assured us of that for decades. They told us that green energy was the future, and the future is here. It's here. As recently as last month, the World Economic Forum claimed that Europe could save, quote, $1 trillion in fossil fuel costs by switching to renewables. But it turns out, and this may not shock you, they had no clue what they were talking about. They knew nothing about the subject they talked about endlessly. Green energy cannot replace fossil fuels. Not now, not anytime soon. Fossil fuels remain what they have always been, the key to civilization. That is true now. That has been true since Homo erectus started the first cooking fire in a cave nearly 1 million years ago. So-called green energy is not close, is nowhere near replacing gas and oil and coal. It's measurable. We could have known this. Anyone with 8th grade math skills could have figured out in about 10 minutes that we cannot replace fossil fuels with renewables or green energy. And of course, they must have known that. When they told you otherwise, it was just posturing. It was childish and destructive fantasy talk that apparently fooled millions of their citizens and millions of ours. The Green New Deal means what it always meant. It means poverty. And the people pushing the Green New Deal must have known that all along. They don't actually believe climate change is an imminent threat. If they actually believed climate change was an imminent threat, an existential emergency, the first thing they would have done, the very first, would be to ban private jets. Oh, but no. To this day, Al Gore still flies on private jets. Barack Obama owns tens of millions of dollars of beachfront property. He knows the oceans aren't rising. Come on. So they're all in on it. It's a scam, but they don't care because they know they personally will escape the consequences of their own policies. So when the French president announces that his people are facing the end of abundance, he's not talking about himself. He's not facing the end of abundance. None of them are. Macron and all of them understand they will always be rich and always be protected. They know that for certain. What's changed, what's so very interesting, is that suddenly everyone else who's been paying attention can see that they were lying. They are frauds, and the entire population of Europe now knows that. Donald Trump, to his credit, whatever you think of him, caught on to this early. 4 years ago, Trump warned Europe about its energy future during his speech at the United Nations. The German delegation laughed at him. Remember this?
Germany will become totally dependent on Russian energy if it does not immediately change course. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are committed to maintaining our independence from the encroachment of expansionist foreign powers. It has been the formal policy of our country since President Monroe.
Oh, they're laughing. We have green parties here in Europe. You have no idea what you're talking about. But they're not laughing anymore. The Europeans have discovered that the real threat to human civilization is not global warming. It never was global warming. The real threat to people is global cooling, otherwise known as winter. Far more people freeze to death every year than die of heat. In 2019, for example, 4 times as many people died of cold as of heat. That's according to the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. So when temperatures in Europe begin to drop a few months from now, this is a huge problem. And that will be obvious to everyone. It's not global warming, it's global cooling. That's what's going to kill your grandmother. And when everyone understands that perfectly well, a lot of things are going to happen. The status quo will crumble. Factories will close. Unemployment will rise. Disposable income will disappear. And you're seeing signs of that already. Personal savings rates are down dramatically. In this country, 60% of Americans can't cover an expected $400 expense. Credit card debt increasing year over year by 13%. That's the biggest jump in 20 years. Total household debt set an all-time record of $15.8 trillion. That's in this country. It's also true, similarly, in Europe. So how will spiraling energy costs affect all of this? And what will be the cascading effect? Well, when the cost of keeping your apartment warm jumps by hundreds of percent in a single year, you become a completely different person. You change your behavior radically. You're no longer tempted to buy a new $1,400 iPhone, or shop at Whole Foods, or even pick up an extra cappuccino. The entire consumer economy grinds to a halt because there's no discretionary income. So it is impossible to overstate the downstream effects on the world of an energy crisis. Everything changes. How are the central banks responding to this? Not well. They seem to be making things worse on purpose. You know, in the United States, we're told not to notice what the Fed does because the Fed is now diverse and therefore great. Amazing piece in the AP just the other day announcing that, quote, leadership of the Federal Reserve has become its most diverse ever. There are more female, black, and gay officials contributing to the central bank's interest rate decisions than at any time in its 109-year history. Okay. In other words, relax. We've got affirmative action. Everything's fine. Great. But somehow it doesn't seem to be working. The same central banks that intentionally caused inflation, and they did, those same central banks are now hiking rates to destroy demand. The problem is, this isn't a demand problem. This is a supply problem. And it stems primarily from the war in Ukraine. Because of that war, the West does not have enough energy to continue its economy or its society. Europe responded to that war by imposing sanctions that they knew would inevitably cause energy shortages. They knew it when they did it. Here's the president of the European Commission back in May.
And let's be clear, it will not be easy, because some member states are strongly dependent on Russian oil, but we simply have to do it. So today we will propose to ban all Russian oil from Europe.
Really? Are you going to be keeping your apartment at 49 degrees Fahrenheit? Will you be walking to work? No, of course not. You'll have whatever you want forever. But the rest of us, she informed us, quote, simply have to do it. And it's not just energy that's being affected by these sanctions. In Brussels, Joe Biden warned that food shortages are inevitable. Remember this?
With regard to food shortage, yes, we did talk about food shortages. And it's going to be real. The price of these sanctions is not just imposed upon Russia. It's imposed upon an awful lot of countries as well, including European countries and our country as well.
Oh, so we're all going to have to buckle down for freedom. We have to shovel billions to Ukrainian oligarchs who clearly hate the United States because it's the right thing to do. We need to hurt Russia because it's our moral duty. So did these sanctions actually hurt Russia? They caused food and energy shortages throughout the West. No, they didn't hurt Russia. Russia today has more than enough energy, more energy that it can use or sell. In fact, Russia has so much excess natural gas that it's simply setting it on fire. That's right, flaring it, as they say. A Russian plant near the border with Finland is burning $10 million worth of natural gas every day. This seems like a big story. So how's the media covering this? Well, here's the BBC. Quote, scientists are concerned about the large volumes of carbon dioxide and soot it is creating, which could exacerbate the melting of Arctic ice. Really? That's your concern? More global warming? When the immediate effect is to make it impossible for people to Europe to stay warm. You can reach a place in your society where the people in charge and their lapdogs in the media become so completely disconnected from the concerns of actual people, become so totally uninterested in the lives of citizens, the society becomes very volatile, and we are fast approaching that point. So we could fix this problem. The solution to this catastrophe is very straightforward. End the war in Ukraine. Reestablish energy flows into Europe and save the global economy, including ours. Is Joe Biden doing that? Are other reckless Western leaders like Boris Johnson doing that? No, they're doing the opposite. They're sending billions more from their dying economies to Ukrainian oligarchs, and for no good reason. The UK has committed $2.8 billion to Ukraine in a country where 70% of pubs may close because they can't afford electricity. This is a government that's preparing for power outages in the middle of winter. As The Guardian reported, under the government's last reasonable worst-case scenario, officials believe the UK could experience blackouts for several days in January if cold weather combines with gas shortages to leave the country short of power. Well, of course cold weather will combine with gas shortages because that's when people use gas, when the weather is cold. Wake up, geniuses. And it's not just happening in the UK. Again, it's happening everywhere. Spain has just approved more than 50 million euros for Ukraine, and that's not including funding for military hardware. In other news, Spain's Congress just implemented temperature controls on commercial buildings. Air conditioning must be no cooler than 27 degrees Celsius. That's 80 Fahrenheit, by the way, in case you don't live there in August. After 10 p.m., shop windows in unoccupied public buildings won't be lit. How about Italy? Well, Italy has allocated more than 600 million euros for Ukrainian refugees. And yet, at the same time, air conditioning in Italian schools and public buildings has already been restricted in what the government labeled Operation Thermostat. That began in May. Italy's Ukraine funding is a lot, but it's not quite as much as France. France has sent more than $2 billion US to Ukraine. And at the same time, France is fining shopkeepers for keeping their doors open and running their air conditioning so we can send more weapons to one of the most corrupt governments in the world. In France, illuminated signs are banned from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. For our part, the United States has sent more than $10 billion in military aid. That's 19 packages of weapons to what Mitch McConnell tells us is the most important thing in the world. Congress has approved more than $30 billion in additional spending. So how is all that spending working out? Are we winning the war in Ukraine? Have we bankrupted Vladimir Putin like Joe Biden claimed we would? The ruble just hit a 7-year high against the US dollar in June. Take a look at this chart comparing the Russian ruble against the euro. Russia's doing well. Europe is not doing well at all. Now Joe Biden is calling for an unconditional surrender from Vladimir Putin. Here's the weird thing. By any actual reality-based measure, Vladimir Putin is not losing the war in Ukraine. He is winning the war in Ukraine. And Joe Biden looks at that and says, we won't stop until you proffer an unconditional surrender. This isn't bad policy. This is nuts. It makes no sense. In fact, it only makes sense if the goal is to completely destroy the West in order to make way for Chinese global dominance. What would be the other explanation for this behavior? Retired Army Colonel Doug McGregor joins us tonight to assess all of this. So Doug, I'm just wondering, this war has consequences not simply for the Ukrainians and the Russian government, but for the West more broadly, our country and particularly Europe. Do the people who make the decisions in Washington about how long to extend this war factor that in?
I think there's an easy answer to that question, Tucker. Absolutely not. There was no careful study or preparation for this policy in any way, shape, or form. And more important, the points that you've made should give pause to the ruling elites of Europe and the United States to remember that in 1789, the French Revolution broke out when the people of Paris could no longer afford to buy bread.
That's right.
Well, where are we headed? Are we headed into a position where our own population can't afford to heat itself and care for itself? We can't operate our scientific industrial infrastructure? I think it's a very real challenge, and I think it's going to hit Europe very hard this winter.
Populations get radical when their standard of living moves backwards. People think things are getting better, the American dream we used to call it. They're calm, they're hopeful. But when they start sliding in the wrong direction, people, as you just noted, get crazy. Is this a concern for Boris Johnson, Macron, or Joe Biden?
Well, if it isn't a concern for the people in Europe, for the ruling elites there like Macron or Olaf Scholz and others, it should be. Because I think we're going to witness something like that in Europe first before we see it here. And as far as the energy issue, yes, end the war in Ukraine, lift the sanctions against Russia. They're doing far more damage to us than they are to Russia. So that's part of it. But here's the real problem. Certainly since Biden came in, he's done everything in his power to eventually stop the investment of capital in the energy sector. So capital has migrated away from the energy sector. We haven't built a new refinery in the United States since the 1970s. He canceled the Keystone Pipeline. And the problem with those things is that it takes years to build the infrastructure, so you don't see the energy flows improve. And then finally, we've lost touch with another reality. Today, the world is different from what it was 30 or 40 years ago. We have huge populations in India and China, new economies that demand energy.
We are lifetimes away from replacing fossil fuels with so-called green energy, lifetimes away globally. And I wish people would be honest about that.
Hey, the most catastrophic thing that the Biden administration has done is what they've not done to try to achieve peace vis-a-vis Ukraine versus Russia. I mean, this could very well turn into World War III. And I'm surprised. I mean, Peter Zion would have to be surprised at how well the Russian energy market is doing. I mean, Russia is pumping, and selling its oil.
Russia confounds the West by recapturing its oil riches. Moscow is raking in more revenue than ever with the help of new buyers, new traders, and the world's seemingly insatiable demand for crude. By Joe Wallace and Anna Hirtenstein. August 29, 2022, 10:05 a.m. Eastern Time. Russia pumps almost as much oil into the global market as it did before its invasion of Ukraine. With oil prices up, Moscow is also making more money. Demand from some of the world's largest economies has given Russian President Vladimir Putin the upper hand in the energy battle that shadows the war in Ukraine and has confounded the West's bid to cripple Russia's economy with sanctions. Sales are booming in Russia's export market, the world's largest in crude and refined fuels. And new trade arrangements have given Mr. Putin cover to use natural gas exports as an economic weapon against Ukraine's European allies. Before the war, Russia supplied Europe with 40% of its gas. It has since throttled flows through the Nord Stream pipeline to Germany and other conduits, driving prices higher and putting pressure on European households and businesses.
And why didn't the Biden administration try to do something about this disaster?
It was supposed to work like this.
Wright,
a guy like centrally involved in the poisoning.
This was recently?
Oh, this was months ago. But what I learned recently is that guy has apparently disappeared. I guess his performance did not get favorable reviews in the Kremlin.
Well, see, it's usually murders like that, and you sort of know who's responsible, even if you can't prove it.
In this case, that's
also that guy was murdered on the bridge. It's pretty obvious he did it.
Yeah, but there's no smoking gun. I mean,
No, but this one there was a genuine mystery. That one, there's not really a mystery.
True. There are a lot of different kinds of parties who could benefit in that case, right?
Yeah. Well, that was satisfyingly complicated.
Well, it is. And as long as I'm on the subject, just to deliver on one more promise about what would be in the parrot room, about how cynical the Biden administration is about this. I wrote a piece in the newsletter about this, and I used the Dugina thing as an occasion to go back and revisit this podcast interview of this pretty high-ranking State Department official named Derek Chollet, he's counselor to the State Department, which means he reports directly to Blinken. And about 6 weeks into the war, he goes on this podcast, and for the first time, we have a State Department official saying, we refused to discuss NATO expansion with them. Acknowledgement isn't the word, because he was proud of it.
Right, so Russia is poised for war, and the United States refuses to discuss NATO expansion. And Russia goes to war, may very well bring about World War III. The United States, under Joe Biden, refused to even discuss NATO expansion with Vladimir Putin. Just sheer recklessness. And think about why Biden did this. One, because his popularity ratings were so low, he thought he could spike his popularity ratings by appearing tough on Russia. And two, it's a geostrategic gamble that they will bankrupt Russia and remove it from among the great powers. But at what an enormous cost. I mean, the end of Ukraine as we know it, about 10 million Ukrainians have left the country. Tens of thousands of people have died or been severely injured.
No, we would not talk to them about their central grievance before the war. One of the things that stood some kind of chance of preventing the war. And when the guy kind of challenged him, the guy said, wait, you didn't want to talk about it? And he kind of said, well, no, but I don't think this is a win for Russia. Because by this time you knew they'd failed to take Kyiv. And he says, you're going to have this long, grinding conflict in the Donbass, and this is going to weaken Russia. And it's clear, he was presenting it as vindication of not negotiate, preventing the war through negotiation, that this would weaken Russia. And I really think, and I've since heard from someone who knows him via email, this guy who says this person who emailed me, whom said and knows this guy, said he is quite sure that this guy's views do represent the views of kind of the State Department, the Biden administration, and the idea is, as Chaz Freeman put it, we've decided to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. That we are viewing it as a proxy war, and it just kind of makes me sick.
The idea that we promoted the war in order to grind them down, that's a little different than using it as an excuse for not bringing up NATO expansion.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that we intentionally didn't make any kind of offer that stood a chance of being accepted because we wanted the war. I wouldn't go that far, but I'm telling you, got to listen to the podcast. He sounds pretty damn happy about the way things are going. And
he must be one of the people who talked to Niall Ferguson.
Why? What did Niall Ferguson say?
Don't you remember early on in the conflict, Niall Ferguson said these crazy Biden people in Washington think they're going to grind Putin down slowly in this war, and it's going to send a warning to China not to mess with Taiwan. And Ferguson thought it was a crazy strategy, but he said people in the Biden administration actually believed it. So he had some sources, probably similar to your sources, right?
And they may. What I would say on behalf of the Biden administration is, I suspect they also looked at the domestic political environment and said,
Exactly. They looked at the domestic political environment and they thought, appearing tough on Russia, that would be good for Joe Biden politically. So we got Dooovid is back in town. Dooovid, how are you? It's been 10 days since I spoke to you last. What's going on, man?
Hey, Baruch Hashem. I finally got the construction in my house finished. I had my bathroom redone, and it dragged on. The contractor had some issues finishing, and just today it's finally finished. I got a new bathroom.
Oh, congratulations. What does it feel like?
I haven't used it yet, so tomorrow morning we'll see.
Fantastic. And have you done any live streams since I spoke to you last?
Week in review with Church of Entropy, Charles Moskowitz, just the usual. I did a stream on my channel going over all of my essays and plans for future essays, some of my research about self and identity formation.
Well, were there any big confrontations on any of these live streams? Any memorable moments to share?
I've been coaching Jennifer in her writing, and I'm not a great writer, but maybe I'm proficient. I have a University of Michigan degree. My mom still helps me out, but I guess her degree is physics, so I've been coaching her, going over her writing, and be a little contentious. Say like expertise is an extension of self, and so like critiquing somebody's writing is can be insulting. But I think we made a lot of progress. I think she's gonna start coming out with essays pretty soon too.
Okay, great. So you sent me an article. It's Open Season on Jews in New York City. Begins the attack that sent 31-year-old Yossi Hershkop to the hospital was an unmysterious crime. It was the opposite of a whodunit. Security cameras recorded clear video of a group of 4 men approaching his car. 2 of them repeatedly punched him through the driver's side window while his 5-year-old child sat in the back seat. Another camera recorded the license plate and model of the attacker's getaway vehicle. The assault took place around 3:40 p.m., July 13th, on a busy street in Crown Heights. Right, so the assailants were easy to identify, but the police did not move quickly. No arrests were made during 2 weeks after the attack. And then finally, after this guy raises a stink on social media, right, after he tweets about it, there's finally an arrest. The first suspect is released on bail, right, on a bond of $10,000. And what kind of efforts is the New York Police Department making towards arresting the second individual who physically attacked him? I mean, it was all there on camera, and And maybe the attack was just too fraught of an event for the police to want to handle too aggressively. Maybe someone feared that drawing additional attention to groups of young black men attaching a prominent Orthodox Jew would threaten to inflame tensions in the neighborhood. Any thoughts on this story, Dooovid?
Yeah, God forbid. It looks pretty bad. There was that attached study from Americans Against Anti-Semitism, and there's really no punishment, or the punishment is very minimal. People are released, and I didn't have a chance to watch. I couldn't find it. The CNN special on rising hate, anti-Semitism, and they always focus on the right wing. But the reality is, most bad things that happen to Jews, it's black on Jewish violence, and specifically in New York City, probably why Eric Adams was elected mayor, because they wanted someone to do something about crime, and being a former police officer, although he hasn't really done anything. And so now you have this case where it's kind of known that they're not going to be punished, and at worst case they're going to be booked and have a court case. I'm not saying it's necessarily like nothing to be arrested or processed, but and there's a lot, like this murderer in Washington D.C. Is on the loose, and it's not not a big news story. God forbid, a young Jewish father was killed in broad daylight installing solar panels, and they have the name, information of the murderer, and it's not news story outside of Jewish sources. It's not considered like a major event, like they have to catch this guy, and this one's murder. Like they probably will eventually catch him, and he'll have some sort of punishment. But even relatively, there's a lot of problems happening in America. There's reasons why the African American vote, criminal reform, lack of money, prisons overcrowding. But I thought it was of note. Just I don't know what it's like there in L.A. that certainly with the shoplifting or stealing, but if it's like violence, where you could basically just get away with it.
And Chabad, Lubavitch's branch of Hasidic Judaism, they tend actually to be fairly soft on punishment. They're not big fans of sending people to prison. So they vote Republican, but they're not exactly law and order, tough on crime, tough on punishment type of people. I mean, they're about the most forgiving and fairly liberal in their attitudes towards law enforcement and punishing wrongdoers. Any thoughts on that? Are other Hasidim similar to that?
Well, there's a different scenario because Chabad is overwhelmingly in an African American neighborhood in a very small minority of tens of thousands of Orthodox Jews within hundreds of thousands of African American and Caribbean, and also Chabad being based on Kirov and repentance, that might have a stronger concept of repentance. Generally like that in the other Jewish communities, they were big Giuliani fans, fans of stop and frisk. You have Shomrim in Crown Heights, but they're not as good as like in Borough Park where I lived. You had countless people involved in Shomrim, walkie-talkies, but Jews are the majority, and there's a subdivision, so there's not really too many blacks in Borough Park, and you have Dominicans, Italians, Chinese, so relatively, it's not as bad in Borough Park. In Crown Heights, also, you have a chunk of African Americans, but I think it's more like a third of Hispanics, African Americans, and Hasidim. And it's also like that in Williamsburg. Like every few days, a Hasidic Jew gets beat up, most of the time by African Americans. Sometimes there'll be an arrest, but even if there is an arrest, there's usually not punishment. So, but it's probably unique among Chabad. Like most Orthodox Jews are kind of high in authority, call the cops, you got to do something about this. I think, I don't know if you agree with that assessment.
Yes.
Jews generally are high in authority, and Orthodox Jews, generally, especially in terms of crime and violence, you're very caught up with the police department and encouraging the police department.
Yeah. Okay, I thought I'd do a stream today about religious attitudes and practices with regard to sex versus secular attitudes and practices. We'll also hit many of the topics that we were talking about via Twitter, but let's just talk about the subject topic for a minute to see if you have any thoughts. So it seems to me one of the big differences between the religious and the secular with regard to sex is that the religious tend to put less importance on it. So generally speaking, when you hang out around religious people, they kind of mock the great importance that secular people put on sex. So from a religious perspective, sex is just one more way to serve God. It's not an end in and of itself. Do you have any thoughts on that, Dooovid?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, like Orthodox Jews are low testosterone, people relatively, like even in yeshiva, even like masturbation is extremely frowned upon. It's a general acceptance that you're going to marry one woman, stay with her for the rest of your life. And even I would say the majority of Orthodox Jews are even willing to marry unattractive women, to some extent. I say all women are attractive to some extent, but it's saying that of the priority scale within Orthodox Judaism, of the attractiveness of the spouse is much lower than in secular society. Although you have the off the derrick people or the people that leave Judaism and want to try out the opposite extreme. And like you said, the stereotype that outside of the Orthodox community is everybody's hypersexualized. That you can't really trust the women around anybody. So if it's a feeling of the women, stay away from men. Even I think we talked about that before, but just having your hair covered, being sneeze. I think we talked about the Gemoras too, about not trying to be too pretty. It's not a good thing if people find you attractive, and an overestimation of the amount of sexual predation in regular society and degeneration.
How does it affect Orthodox Jews to live in a hyper-sexualized society? Now, it seems to me from what I observe and what I hear that still the majority of Orthodox Jews are virgins when they get married. The overwhelming majority of Orthodox Jews who get married do not get divorced. And to be a sexually promiscuous Orthodox Jew is practically a contradiction in terms. But even Orthodox Jews are going to be affected by the hypersexualization of the society around them. So one of the ways that I see that is that I know pretty much any Orthodox Jewish man that I know well over about age 28 is a porn addict if he's a bachelor. Like if you're an Orthodox Jew and you're still a bachelor over age 28, you're usually a porn addict. Also, a lot of married Orthodox men struggle with porn addiction. So that's probably the primary way that a hypersexualized society affects Orthodox Jews. Any thoughts, Dooovid?
Well, I mean, people are people, and are going to have the regular urges of any human, but there's a certain. I mean, certainly the rabbinic exceptions for pornography to using pornography to get yourself aroused in order to have relations with your wife. I'm not sure about the levels of porn addiction. I mean, if you're an older single, I think there's a high amount of low testosterone, low sexual aggression. I mean, like I remember Jewish events, and there just be a few women, and even in New York, like promiscuous type women, and like Jews in general, but Orthodox Jews, I call them low T, but even saying like not interesting, like a misunderstanding of like how could even someone act like this. So I mean, there's a certain element of porn addiction, like God forbid homosexuality, child molestation, where the drive is suppressed and comes out in other forms like homosexuality or child molestation. But I think there's a certain element of asexuality or high intellectual people that are down on the bodily urges and you're kind of continuously in the fight. So I'm not sure about what you're saying. Like I would doubt that like porn addiction, that if someone's within Orthodox Judaism, they're not going to maintain a healthy porn addiction. Like I think you'd have to somewhat be on the down, uh, approaching the outskirts. Like, are you still davening, putting on tefillin? If you're Hasidic, do you still have the beard? Do you still go to the base medrash and learn? And if you're doing something that's so out of line, like a porn addiction, is that going to cause your inability to still daven with a minion, go to the base medrash, and learn? Or you think that saying if you're an old bacher, old bachelor, that you fall out of going to minyan and learning in the base medrash or going to yeshiva, or you think that the person maintains the Orthodox lifestyle and a porn addiction at the same time?
Well, there are people who from my personal knowledge, maintain an Orthodox lifestyle and a porn addiction at the same time. On the other hand, you can kind of tell that they're not for Brenta. You can tell that they're not passionate about their Yiddishkeit. You can tell that they're not davening with kavana, praying with intention. So I'd have to think it verges on the impossible to be passionately devoted to your davening, to your prayers, and also maintain an active porn addiction at the same time. So it is possible to maintain the Orthodox lifestyle without having much ruach, without having much spirit behind it.
Mostly what you do find is sometimes divorcees are off the derrick where people go really overboard to the other side because they feel that they missed out on it. And like, or sometimes people are upset that they're older virgins, saying like, in my 20s, I'm a virgin, in 30s or 40s, virgin. And they're saying like, Jews to some extent, we have big egos and, say like something that the majority of African-American teenagers accomplish, that, a lot of, Jews will have a difficult time accomplishing. And, if it was a level like, okay, like, I used to party promote. I knew a lot of Hasidim, and I mean, prostitution's a reality. Like in New York, there's prostitution. You might find Orthodox Jews that will visit prostitutes, or even like a bar. But a lot of times, like the training of the Orthodox Judaism, it could also be the same with Hindus or any strict religion, maybe Seventh-day Adventists. It's just like foreign to say like I can't bring myself to behave like this. I've been trained so well to repress my animal urges to think that this is wrong that I just can't bring myself to do it.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that Orthodox Jews are more likely to use pornography than non-Jews. It's just among the Orthodox Jewish bachelors who I know well, after about age 30, all the ones I know well are porn addicts. Now, so many different...
You learned Daf Yomi. Are you saying that any of those people also learned Daf Yomi?
I'm not sure.
You're saying you learned Daf Yomi at the same time you had your porn addiction? Like that was possible that you'd go to Daf Yomi in the morning, and even when you're working in porn? I mean, I read your book where you mentioned that, but I would assume that's kind of unique in that matter, that you could be within the community, like especially if you're an FFB, you're born Orthodox Jew, you're still within the community. But if you're still to properly function, like you're davening in the morning, you're showing up to synagogue at night to learn Torah, you can almost always tell when you're on the inside, like this guy's falling out, this guy's doing stuff that he shouldn't be doing, and even what you're talking about. like, like we're in synagogue to learn Torah, not to hear your stupid stories about what's going on in the outside world. And so like the guy with the porn addiction, if he comes to synagogue or he wants to tell everybody about what's going on in the outside world, as if you're on the right path. It's like, who cares? Like, why do you keep on bringing this stuff up?
Yeah, that's another difference. If you go to an Orthodox synagogue and you start telling people that you banged a prostitute or that you've been sexually promiscuous, you're not going to get congratulated for that. I mean, people will think you're a freak and a total weirdo. I mean, Orthodox Jews understand human weakness, but they're not going to congratulate you. So, for example, if I banged a porn star and I shared that with someone secular, one of the most likely responses I'd get would be, were you safe? Meaning, did you use a condom? But if I share that information with someone's religious, they would say something like, what were you thinking? Like, my God, you've become a complete degenerate. So very different reactions.
Yeah, I mean, you knew that was wrong. Like, how could you possibly have not known that was wrong? I mean, okay, you succumbed, and like, okay, maybe she was beautiful and it was impossible to resist, or the circumstance. But it's say like, like, come on, you're an Orthodox Jew. Like, how could you have not known that was wrong? Doesn't matter how beautiful she was. It doesn't matter, she was famous. And I was saying, like, bringing the outside into the synagogue, even if you're not talking degeneracy, just like, like, I mean, you're in Hollywood, so you could be meeting famous people. And but saying, if you're for Brent, Torah Jew, no one cares about your Hollywood stories. It doesn't matter who you're hanging out with or like what you accomplished. It's like, why are you bringing that inside the base medrash?
Yeah, and to be honest, I wasn't talking about this stuff in a synagogue or in a base medrash. Now, you also have some background in Hinduism. What is Hinduism's attitude towards sex, to compare and contrast it with Orthodox Judaism?
To some extent, it's even more extreme than Orthodox Judaism, because and I think Indians probably have lower testosterone in general than even Jews, even Orthodox Jews. But like, generally, Orthodox Judaism promotes, besides for the the menstrual purity laws, a healthy sex life with your wife. And so with some of the extreme Hinduism, it's kind of like sex is evil. It's only for procreation, and you should do it as few times as possible. And there could also be ethnic culture, just having a lower level of testosterone.
Yeah.
Although also porn addiction is huge in India, and there's also degeneracy of off the derrick Hindus and strip clubs and prostitutes and all that. And I mean, God forbid, Hindus and Jews a lot of times are good customers to prostitutes, because they're less of a risk to beat them and more likely to pay. So like, if you're a prostitute and like, God forbid, you're like, oh, it's an African American customer, maybe he's going to beat me up and not pay. You think, oh, it's a Jewish customer, or like a Indian Hindu customer, he's likely not to beat me up and he's probably going to pay.
So one of the most interesting statistics I saw with regard to marriage is that the number one criteria for a marriage lasting or not is how many sex partners the woman had before she entered the marriage. And those who married a woman who was a virgin were the most likely to have a marriage that lasts. And so I'd have to think that this is one of the key elements in traditional religious people staying married, is that they're much less likely to have had previous sexual partners. And I mean, if you're having sex, if you're married to a woman who's had 10 previous sexual partners, I can't imagine that bodes for good, long-term success in your marriage. So I think this is one of the cases where ignorance is relatively bliss. I'd have to think that there is a quality of uniqueness and specialness and holiness to never having any other sexual partner aside from your spouse. and that once people have tasted the forbidden fruit, it's something that they're not going to have what people who have abstained do get to have with their spouse. Any thoughts?
Yeah, when I was making that list of surprising things, and one of them I mentioned was how secluded or protected from the outside world that Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Jews are, that is almost shocking. And you're saying, like, yeah, it's almost definitely true. The marriage is going to be much more likely to last if the people are virgins going into it. And you're also having children like that too, that so if you get older, even if you go off the derrick or divorced later, if you're a father of multiple kids and you're divorced, it not always, like I've seen a lot of degenerates who are divorced and deadbeat dads who become extreme degenerates, but just keeping you occupied, and then saying, like, it's harder to be a porn addict if you have a bunch of kids running around, because it's harder to seclude yourself, find extra time, or not get caught, because you always have kids looking through your stuff. They're going to catch you.
So it's not like religious people completely renounce the pleasures of this world, but they understand them in proportion. So I would think that there aren't that many Orthodox Jews who primarily regard their sex life as fulfilling a divine commandment, and that they maintain thoughts about God when they're making love to their spouse. But it's still like eating and drinking and all sorts of other activities. It all falls within the rule book and within the folk ways of the people and the community and the tradition. So I would think that, generally speaking, religious people don't put as much importance and don't depend as much on exciting sexual encounters to keep a relationship going.
Yeah, and if they haven't, you don't have the comparison of the outside secular world, or they have an unrealistically negative view towards the outside world, then they don't feel like they're missing that much. But I said, like, compared to some forms of Hinduism or Christianity that looks at sex in general as evil or bad, Judaism is generally the golden mean, the middle ground, where sex has rules around it, but it's not in and of itself seen as evil, and within the proper conditions you're expected to to enjoy it. And there's God forbid, like the hole in the sheet, but a lot of I mean, you could, God forbid, it's probably not proper to talk about, but you could see, like, married Hasidim, or having active sex life, or trying different things out, trying to keep the love relation active. And I think generally the Nita going to half of the month without having relations does have an effect on keeping sexual relations exciting with the marriage. Like, even if they're both beautiful people, you have the most attractive wife, if you might get burnt out or lose the attraction, but the Nita cycle, not touching, separation, sleeping in different beds, I think there's been studies, or at least from the Orthodox Jewish perspective, that it keeps romance in the marriage alive over the lifetime, to have that regular monthly half separation.
Now, on the other hand, I notice a lot of Orthodox Jews who have marriages of extreme sexual privation. From what they've told me, that I would expect that the more religious you are, the less likely the woman is to be able to abandon herself to the sexual act and to pursue pleasure. So it's not like it's just a garden of roses if you live life as an Orthodox Jew and stay a virgin until you get married. It still comes with considerable challenges. What have you learned from conversations and observation of people's relative happiness or lack thereof with regard to their sex life when you compare and contrast, say, Orthodox Jews and secular people?
Well, I mean, a lot of times, like I mentioned, that from the Orthodox view, a lot of times there's a misappropriation of how degenerate secular culture is, and then there's because I mean, if we're outsiders, you're a convert on Bolshuva, and then I was actively involved in party promoting or different things, so you might be the certain element of the community that's like, oh man, I can't believe I missed out on this because I was an Orthodox Jew, especially people who, the nature of Bolshuva converts to, sometimes befriend in the Orthodox people who are trying to be less religious, that you really feel that they missed out on it. And then you could be like their coach for, going out into the secular world. And even though, I'm kind of an introvert, not much of a ladies' man, that still like somehow I would, play the role of like a dating coach, to, God forbid, to an Orthodox Jew. But I think Orthodox Jews don't talk about that kind of personal stuff that much. They talk about marriage, so like all the time, like, oh, how come you're not married, or dating, and have to set you up. But like even within that, I think you're Orthodox Jew, you'd be kind of embarrassed to be like, oh, I want someone that's like attractive, so it's like mitos and the family, and so there's all sorts of talk about setting people up and kids and extended family, but generally the Orthodox Jew, I think, would shy away from, like I mentioned, what you said, you were kind of disappointed or shocked that Orthodox Judaism didn't make people better people, and then I was pushing back. I think in many ways Orthodox Judaism made me or people better people in the things that they emphasize, and that in Hebrew, like a busha, embarrassment around sex and degeneracy, that like now I'm an Orthodox Jew, I'm embarrassed to like sexualize women or openly talk about that stuff. I'm personally, if not fearing God, embarrassed before God, but like a healthy embarrassment to talk about these subjects, as opposed to in the secular world. I mean, you find degenerates in Orthodox culture too, but people who have no embarrassment about talking about these subjects.
So I remember conservative Rabbi Harold Kushner ran into a woman who he'd known from conservative Judaism, but she'd joined an Orthodox synagogue, and he asked her, why'd you do that? And she said, well, when I go to an Orthodox synagogue, nobody tells me a dirty joke. And so that's generally speaking true. It's quite rare that anyone's going to go up to a woman in or around an Orthodox synagogue and tell her a dirty joke. I mean, there are different standards of modesty.
Yeah, if I use the word embarrassed, like I'm an Orthodox Jew, I would personally be embarrassed to act like that, because like I'm an Orthodox Jew, I don't act like that.
Yeah. Okay, so I asked you before the show if you've had any more revelations about life that might be fun to discuss on the show. And you mentioned running away from home at age 13. You were taken in by a foster family for a few days. So what drove you to run away from home, and what did you learn from the experience?
You're just unhappiness, issues at home. Like, I don't talk too much like my private problems as a kid. But kind of the charitable nature, like how nice people were. I got caught stealing from a grocery store. Well, two aspects. One is like I lied and gave a false identity, and it took like a week even for them to figure out who I was. So the nature of like that, you could do that, you could lie and fool people like that, and maybe a lot of people. I saw Lex Friedman, they had the CIA analysis, and the guy was saying like he's friends with criminals because most people wouldn't think that you could just lie like that. So there's the experiences, but the police officer talked he talked the store owner out of pressing charges. The police officer bought me McDonald's out of his own money. There's a family that took me into their house and clothed me, fed me. Just a certain, and it was in a like a small town in New York, a non-Jewish town, but certain charitable nature of mankind that I saw, like as a youth, might fear the police, or you would say like, no, there are good people out there, and so I saw that in my youth like that. I don't know if you ever had experience. I know you were in foster homes like that, but I'm saying there just people out there that make an attempt to be good people, are charitable.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of goodness out there. I'm just curious, did you ever steal from a store again?
That may have been the last time I did. I stole occasionally as a younger kid. That may be the last time I stole like that. And it was food. Like, I ran away, I didn't have any money, so I was just taking food.
Hey.
But like I got caught, and they called the police, and then I remember the police officer convinced the person, like, he's just a kid, the guy wanted to press charges. He convinced him not to press charges, and then bought me McDonald's out of his own money.
Wow. Okay, Rodney, long time no talk. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Luke. I got to be careful what I say, Luke. I have the Biden administration stopped to visit me today, so.
Oh, really?
Always watching.
Why did they stop to visit you?
I don't know. Ask him.
Oh, that's tough one. So seriously, Rodney, I haven't spoken to you for months. What's going on?
Oh, I've been dealing. I'm actually back from LA, and I'm back tomorrow. I've been having some chop shop done at Cedars. So actually, I'm kind of sitting upright for the first time in probably about 5 days. I got stitches all down here in the gut. So if I'm a little tight, then bear with me. But it's kind of an interesting secular sex versus religious sex. I wonder if there's really a difference. I saw a great clip of a Catholic priest in Buckeye, and he was railing. It was mostly directed against Biden. It's all over the internet. But his overall message was about in the last 30, 40 years, the bishops, and I'd say probably most religious leaders, stopped really tending to their flock. They stopped, really being enforcers of the doctrine, which is why you have a lot of this. You have some religion, supposedly religion, that's essentially motivational speaking, don't offend anybody, to keep the donations coming in. And then you have the Protestants having schizophrenia because they had to modify their theology. And then, the Catholics, depends on which, if you're talking to the rather conservative Catholics, they're holding true. But I tend to agree with this priest that when the leaders of the church stop really enforcing the doctrine on the everybody, I think then you see kind of a trend into this, anything goes, and feels good, do it, and then you just go to church. I mean, confession has become something that, I'll just go out and do whatever I want, then confess I didn't do it, and all is well. So, I think as far as sexual worries, people blame the 60s, but probably the last 25, 30 years has gotten far worse than anything the 60s ever spawned. That's just me. I have sons and daughters, and I took a little while coming on because I made a list. I was thinking, both my wife, their mother, and I, we give them the talk about what to bring home and what not to bring home, and what to look for and what not to look for. Can I share it with you? At least mine.
Yes.
Yeah, my wife has a much stricter version, but I actually have two primary rules that I tell them. And I say rules, they can follow it fine. If they don't, and then if things blow up, I'll be happy to laugh at them. But for the sons and for the daughters, no men with kids and an ex, and for my sons, no single mothers, because you wouldn't just be hooked, marrying that particular partner. You're marrying their spouse for a good 18 years, and no matter what, let me tell you, that's never going to be your child. And not only are you hooked up with the ex and dealing with all that unnecessary drama and BS, you're also dealing with the prior in-laws. So I always encourage my kids, look, there's a lot of fish out in the sea that haven't spawned, offspring yet. Go for one of those and have your own family. It sounds cruel, especially in the days where we're glorifying deadbeat dads and making excuses for them and single mothers. I can't understand why we do either. But that's rule number one before I get into the basic ones. With regard to my sons, I tell them, if the girl is well known at clubs and at bars and online, she's a no. Don't even bring her home. If she's addicted to attention, she has to have attention by other people, friends, men, social media. That's a no. If she requires a girls' night out, that would be a no in my book. If she has to lie about you, definitely a no. If she's littered in tattoos and dresses trashy like a prostitute, no. And my wife actually is a little more forceful on this one. And if she's estranged from family, no, just no. And if she requires you to change who you are or to estrange from your family, no. And then with daughters, it's a couple. I said no one with kids. Don't marry a guy with kids. There's plenty of them spawned before. But if he's unemployed habitually, no. If he's uneducated, no. If he's not addressing numbers 1 and 2, I just stated seriously, no. If he still acts single, no. If he kisses and tells and talks graphically about you to other women or to his buddies, that's a no. If it requires you to change who you are, no. And then always with both cases, exes just can't be friends. So that's what I've told them. I said they can take the advice, take it or leave it. I wish somebody would have given me that advice when I was, a lot younger. It didn't happen, and I kind of learned, learned by the school of hard knocks.
How old were you when you got married?
The first time?
Yeah.
18.
And the second time?
25. And that one stuck. That one stuck for 30 years.
And what was the difference in you between 18 and 25?
Well, I can't remember who said it, but it's a wise quote. It says that you take somebody that is exactly the same at 18 as they were at 30, in my case 25, then they've wasted, and they've wasted a lot of time, not made any progress. I matured quite a bit, and I started, I did mature, I had to, and had children, and I was just in a better place. I got a lot more spiritual, and I didn't feel the need to rush. I think there's kind of a situation when young men and women are younger, and I think it afflicts women. It used to afflict women probably more than guys, and now I think it's reversed. Where I'm 18. I'm not a man, or I'm not a woman. I got to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend. I got to have a spouse. I got to have kids, and of course, some of the newer generation they want it all right now. I must say, I was probably followed in that category where I kind of wanted to do it all really quick, and that was a mistake.
And what differences, if any, do you notice that are generalizable between religious people and secular people with regard to sex?
Well, it depends on the religious people. Let me go back, and there's another, let me answer that question. I think it depends on who you ask. If you ask a Muslim, devout Muslim, a devout LDS, or an Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox Jew, you're going to get, or in some case, a Latin Catholic, you're going to get a different answer than you will, a Presbyterian, Methodist, whatever. I think you're going to get a totally different answer. And I think that has more to do with how things have morphed and probably changed politically, where politics now drives everything, including theology. So I have noticed that, a couple of my kids are LDS. We are not it's not just one religion in my family. A couple of kids are LDS. My oldest son married an LDS girl, very nice girl. She's not, I wouldn't say, ultra-Orthodox LDS, but she's a very nice girl. I think he made a great choice. Now, he remained Catholic, interestingly, and I don't know how they balance, but I can say that my oldest son matured probably a lot sooner than I did, because he got more in tune with the spirituality and religion sooner than I did. He embraced it. Me, it took a couple of catastrophic life events for me to fully come around. I still like to be in charge of everything. That's trying to do that is rather stupid.
Go ahead. Keep going.
Go ahead.
Oh, Dooovid, I just wanted to get you back in here. Dooovid, I'm just curious, what is life like in a highly sexualized society that is just constantly bombarding you with, sexually charged material, just walking down the street, the way people dress, billboards, TV, the internet? There's just a constant bombardment of sexual attractions. How does that affect you and your life, Dooovid?
Well, I think it adds to a sense of identity. And a lot of times, like, you're an Orthodox Jew or extreme, Hindu, you have a feeling like it's you up against the world, that like, of course, everyone else acts like that. And that's what sets me apart from the rest of society. And, the over-sexualization is a simple thing to, create that separate identity. Like, I'm an Orthodox Jew, I don't act like that. And, like, of course, the rest of society acts like that. That's what differentiates us. So, like, I lived in Manhattan. I had roommates. I was in the university dorms. I had, rapper. I even had a prostitute as a roommate for a period of time in New York, who would, God forbid, bring customers into the apartment. But I think it solidified my identity. Like, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I don't behave like this. So I'm not sure if that, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
Like
what was that like, having a prostitute as a roommate? Did you have interesting conversations? Was it distasteful to you, or was it no big deal?
No, I was curious. Like, I mentioned that on the list, like, of the phenomenon of prostitution. And I was shocked that, the nature of, just, the long lines, like, took out an ad in the Village Voice, and people would call, and people would pay, and so it was kind of not shocking and surprising at the same time. I mean, I knew human nature, and I spoke to her. I tried to talk her out of it, convince her to go to school and read books and become more educated. But so I think it actually strengthened my identity and gave me, like, a pat on my back, like, I never touched her, like, I passed the test, like, I'm a good Orthodox Jew. I was able to not succumb to my temptations. It made me feel proud of myself.
And Rodney, what has your experience been living in a hypersexualized society?
Well, I find it rather entertaining, and let me tell you, when I was younger, I embraced it. That's the difference. I had a different kind of different view, but as I said, that time period between when you're young and you start having to have responsibilities, and you start thinking, wow, I got kids. I can't act 17 when you're a child. I wonder, I go back to, I think there's two parallel societies. Now, my wife, tell you what she tells the daughters. She said she doesn't care. She tells our daughters, it doesn't matter what you read on the internet or on social media or any of the, girly magazines that encourage promiscuity. My wife told my daughters there's always going to be, a woman is always going to be held to a higher standard. And my wife agrees with it, as a matter of fact. She said, you should. And I asked her about that. It's a kind of an interesting thing to say. And she said, well, I don't want my sons bringing home sluts. So they should be held to a higher standard. And likewise, that doesn't give the men a pass to be anything less than gentlemen when they're looking at entering into a marriage and want a family. And to me, what I've seen a lot, Luke, on streams and on the internet, where guys are complaining, they want a wife and they can't get one, they can't get a family. Well, if you look at their pattern of behavior, things that they say, They're not ready yet. And I highly encourage people, don't do it till you're absolutely ready, because it can be very destructive and permanent. But in a hypersexualized society, we have those people that want to remain, I don't want to use the word pious, but I'll just say we're decent, respect their cultural traditions and their religious traditions. It's almost as if the LDS and the Orthodox Jews kind of have it, have kind of, figured it out, in that they're rather insular. I don't think I'm telling you anything that is not true, but they have almost an internal community, a state within a state. They have their own almost social welfare programs, and they very much support the family. And so they kind of inoculate themselves from that society and then leave the other to just dither and circle in the toilet. And there's something admirable. I find something admirable about that, to tell you the truth.
And what's the meaning of Joseph Stalin behind you?
I said that it's a prop. I said the Biden administration. It's a joke that my oldest son dropped that off.
And we'll go off topic for a minute. Do you have any thoughts on the war in Ukraine?
Well, it's not going any. Ukraine's not going to win. They're going to end up having to cry uncle. It goes back to what I said a long time ago when it first started. Either Russia would win it early and stop at the Dnieper River, or it'd be a battle of resources. I don't understand how so-called conservatives, anti-war MAGA Republicans, who complained about the wars overseas, can just allow basically an auto pay, a U.S. taxpayer auto pay, to be sending a couple $1 billion every week or every other week to Ukraine. And now Biden wants to send $3 billion to Taiwan. So, here we can say, rah, 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 we got out of Iraq. By the way, Iraq was imploding earlier today. The American embassy was evacuated by a helicopter. We haven't seen it on the news yet, but it's all over Middle Eastern TV. We can say we got out of these wars. Well, actually, we didn't. We got out of Afghanistan. We surrendered out of Iraq. We surrendered Afghanistan and then jumped right into a proxy war that in a year, less than a year, has cost almost as much as Iraq or Afghanistan has. So I just don't get it. If you total up all the dollars that have gone both direct and indirect, including we're paying the salaries of the Ukrainian parliament. We sent them governmental aid to fund their government, and the first thing they did was the parliamentarians at Kiev gave themselves a 70% raise. Really interesting. But if you were to total up all that dough, you can cut a check to every American citizen, emphasis on citizen, for about $1.8 million.
And what do you make of the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago, Rodney?
Well, I think politically it was a stupid thing to do. I think it was seen as whoever greenlighted it thought it was going to break. It was probably going to take away, and it has to some degree. But overall, politically, it has solidified the FBI credibility as being in the dumpster. When you consider that they went and told Facebook that the laptop was Russian propaganda. I mean, what's the FBI doing? I'm surprised that the FBI director didn't tell Justice, push back on it. Why don't you do another subpoena before you send us down there? Because this is going to be a, pardon my language, shitstorm for the Bureau and for its credibility, given Crossfire Hurricane, given the laptop story. I mean, who actually believes that the FBI can be honest brokers, especially when you start looking at all those documents and texts and emails between agents about tinkering in elections? And the Presidential Records Act is not a criminal act to begin with. And it specifically says the president shall determine what is personal. I mean, they've got a lot of problems, and I like the fact that the judge is appointing a special master, because I think what we're going to find is there's no nuclear documents. That kind of dropped off. That was kind of a BS thing for social media gratification. But we're going to find that the level of, say, classified documents, which can also include the inner operations of the White House. I don't know if people understand classification means the documents that shows, when the coffee is delivered from the vendor to the White House is a classified information. So I think what we're going to see is this was an attempt to divert attention away from some of Biden's other problems. That's why he snuck in the bailout for the student loans, which is absolutely grotesque, and then hope to light a fire on Trump to ignite his base. Biden needed to ignite his base. His base sees him as a doddering old fool with pre-dementia that, has crashed the economy, and he needed something to excite them. So how can he excite them more than to go over and sic the feds on Donald Trump, which they've been demanding for a long time, every bit as much as the MAGA crowd has been demanded Donald Trump to sic the feds on the Democrats. So sorry, it's all become so politically polarized now, and I think we passed the point of no return, sadly.
Dooovid, you've been friends with transsexuals. What did you learn from that experience?
God forbid, like I live in Manhattan, and there's so many of them. Chelsea. I think half of the people who've had the surgery, in the whole world live in Chelsea, Manhattan. To some extent, they're normal people. You talk about normal things. There's a lot of perversion. A lot of them are involved in forms of prostitution, and surprising that God forbid there's so many customers. So it was almost shocking, the phenomenon. The first time you met someone, it's like, why would you possibly do that? To then saying they're kind of like normal people, and then the level of the people that do that engage in kind of pejorative, like perverse sexual behavior or even forms of prostitution. And then Manhattan culture, just that there's such a huge market for transsexual prostitutes, is almost mind-boggling. But if you're in Manhattan, you almost have to be blind not to see it, because there's just so many of them. And then in certain neighborhoods, they're all over the place, like the meatpacking district, or the Village, specifically Chelsea, and even certain places at night where prostitutes stand. So like you're driving through. I just kind of like to drive when a car just drive through Manhattan late at night, and eventually the areas, and there's places where prostitutes stand, and there's places where transsexual prostitutes stand. And so it's shocking that the phenomenon exists. It's shocking that it's so popular.
And do you ever give it like a transsexual prostitute a ride home or anything?
Yeah, I didn't discriminate. Like, God forbid, there's a lot of cocaine use. So a lot of them were my roommate was, said he was dealing cocaine, and a lot of his customers were transsexuals, and a lot of their customers were they're, I don't call them like prostitutes, and were their clients. So that like the level of cocaine use and related to their sexual activity. And I could deal with people as people. Like I'm kind of homophobic, and would definitely recommend against that. But I could still deal with people as people, and maintain friendships. All here in Metro Detroit, I don't think I have, but like when I lived outside of Manhattan, I didn't maintain friendships. I think it's specifically in Manhattan that because it's set up where they could be proud of it. They have their own area. It's a known phenomenon. But like outside of Manhattan, I don't think I ever met a transsexual like that. I don't know if it's like that in LA. Like a certain district, they're all over the place, and they're proud of it. If you live there, you probably have friends like that. But in Brooklyn, I don't think I ever met a single transsexual.
And Rodney, you've got a lot of transsexual friends. What have you learned from that?
Oh, just watch. Actually, no, I've never had a tranny friend. However, when I was 17, and a friend of mine, best friend of mine, we were down drinking in Mexico. A tranny approached and started fawning on him, and he was too drunk to really realize that was a tranny. So I let him go upstairs and waited about 5 minutes. He came out screaming in his boxer shorts, and I thought that was kind of funny. But they're all around. I mean, Luke, you live in LA. I'm there quite a bit for medical. I practically live there part-time, at least now through at least October. and you'd have to be blind and ignorant not to see them. It is rather entertaining, but it all goes to the what I would see as the moral degeneracy. Keep talking about prostitutes. Prostitution used to be a crime in which the John and the prostitute would be arrested. Now the law considers the prostitute a human trafficking victim, arrests the John, and within an hour, the prostitute is right back out there in the corner turning tricks. A prostitute's not a crime victim; it's a business fool. And there's a reason why society cracked down on it. There was the moral issue, which morals were not allowed to have anymore, and there was also the public health issue. And so it's just kind of weird how inverted. This is why I said I think we have reached the point of no return, and we're starting to see now parallel societies in the country. You hear the thing on Twitter or whatever about national divorce. Well, the country's already separating, Luke, and I don't think there's anyone who can actually deny that. They're already separating from those people that just have absolute polar opposite value systems. That's already happening, and it's just absolutely bizarre. Somebody was just killed on Hollywood Boulevard. Last night? Guy just walked up to him and started shooting right on Hollywood Boulevard, the tourist side. I don't know where we're going as a society, where everything is inverted, not just sexual mores, but in terms of crime, in terms of finance. I mean, it's okay. I paid my kids' student loans off. Now I have to pay somebody else's because they took 5 years for a 4-year degree in queer studies. I have to pay that. I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous where we're going. I'm not so much worried. I'm not so much worked up about that as other people are, because that's going to get struck down in the courts. The president can't relieve federal debt. Only Congress can relieve federal debt.
This is the first thing we talked about, Luke, when I mentioned my conservative multiculturalism. And so in New York, it's districted like that. They have their area, and they even have like political representation, and it's a phenomenon. I'm sure in LA also. And just like I could be Hasidic and live my lifestyle, they could do what they want in their area and district. And like when they're outside their area, they're more careful. But like within their area, it's generally like that's their area. That's the thing there.
Rodney, I'm disturbed by the overwhelming number of low-effort transsexuals. I would think that if you're going to be a transsexual, you should put some bloody effort into it. Like, try to look your best. But transsexuals these days, they don't care about looking their best. When I was a kid, transsexuals really put some effort in. And we all appreciated it, but transsexuals these days, they're just so low effort, Rodney. I think it's part of the wider decline of America.
Yeah, I mean, what is it with these low rent trannies that just go down to the Salvation Army and get a dead woman's wig and a dead woman's blouse and then walk around and declare they're the opposite sex so they can walk into the showers and look at little girls?
Well, I mean, God forbid, like in New York, I think there's a substantially high amount of sexual activity among people in that area. So like, I'm not sure if someone would become a transsexual, at least, even have the full surgery with the plans of, being low sex. And then even like surprising that it's popular. There's, like a clientele for it. And that there's even, people that prefer tranny prostitutes that, like, God forbid, it's a phenomenon. And so it's almost mind-boggling. We're talking about being embarrassed of sex in general, or just saying like I couldn't bring myself to act like that. But to people who are over-sexualized, that they would experiment and then even prefer certain things like that. It's almost mind-boggling. And then you get the mindset in Manhattan. Like if you're comparing like Detroit, there's a lot of strip clubs or degeneracy. Like but Manhattan, probably to some extent, maybe LA, San Bernardino has some of the worst degeneracy in the world.
It's kind of interesting. I wonder, Luke, is there a gluttony of sex in America today? It seems like all the bemoaning and complaining and emphasis, I get a different signal. I get a different signal that it's not as pervasive, at least it was in the 80s when I was younger. It seems to me that the main complaint is they're not getting it enough, and the people that men and women complain will lie about the very basic same thing. They lie about the sex they did get, and they'll lie about the sex they didn't get. And you see
good. Some of the number is going down in general, like across America. But like if you saw like monkeypox or things in the certain areas, maybe like San Francisco or areas of New York, it's probably just as high or higher than it's ever been. But overall across America, it's going down.
Oswald Spangler in the chat he says Americans are still overall sexual prudes. I think that depends on where you're at, to be honest. I think the separation, Luke, we're talking about parallel societies, mainly coastal and cities versus rural. I think that probably the attitudes towards sex in the cities among what I would say the enlightened liberals and all of that is probably, anything goes, but I venture there is more sexual activity among the more conservative and, rural areas of the country. Something inside me think that's the case. That those that scream the loudest about it and demand the most of it and want it any way goes are the ones that aren't necessarily getting it and want it. And those that, of course, I don't know, I've always lived by a motto, Luke, a man of honor does not kiss and tell. And so to me, it's just something rather cheap. And that's something, even when I was somewhat a different person spiritually and otherwise, I didn't run out and bragging about I did that girl, or I'm going to do or whatever. And that was a game changer if I found out that a girlfriend had done the same with me. That usually would end the relationship. So, and that's just a little tick that I had from very early on.
We got Luke. I mean, God forbid, the international expert on San Bernardino Valley, but like in Manhattan, I mean, people go to the coastal cities because they want that lifestyle, and that so I mentioned, like, I think statistically, literally half of the people in the whole world who have had the sex change operation live in Chelsea, New York. But that's the advantage. That's why one of the reasons why people go to the big city. And if you talk like people who fall into pornography or prostitution, I mean, most people don't go to the big city planning on getting into pornography or prostitution. They have bigger dreams, and it doesn't work out like that, and they fall into prostitutions or pornography. But they could acclimate to the lifestyle, and to a large extent, that lifestyle is only available in the big city.
Luke, I never had a tranny friend, but I did know a girl in college that had shall we say, dabbled in porn, not for a very long time. And she told me it was the worst mistake she'd ever made because, she was dabbling in porn for economic reason, which was stupid. And she said it ended up costing her soul for about almost 10 years because people would find her, would know that she'd been in that industry, and they'd want to do all this stuff like they do in videos. She said, well, that's not actually what real sex is. But at the same time, it literally put the scarlet letter on her for almost 10 years before she was able to overcome it. And how she overcome it was the Catholic Church. She actually became very religious, very spiritual. I believe it was a dentist. So she turned out very well. A guy that took care of her and, the sins of the past and such. But she always talked about how it was horrible, not to mention the scarlet letter, but the fact that when she, would try to date after she was out of it, it was always, guys that wanted to reenact her videos.
Yeah. Rodney, whatever happened to honor and honor codes? I mean, honor used to be a big deal in America, but as each year goes by, honor is seen as more and more of an anachronism.
I don't know. I mean, I think that goes with, anything else. Listen, everything flows downwards from culture. And, if you are indoctrinated to believe that anything goes, and that your word is not your bond. And, like I said, the man of honor does not kiss and tell. And that everything has, I call it situational ethics. Let me put it that way, Luke. I think that honor has been replaced by situational ethics. It's what's ever good for me in the present time. So if I've given my word, say, to pay back a loan, and Mac Daddy, the crack dealer, is offering somebody else's money to pay it off, I'm gonna sacrifice my honor and let somebody else bear my cross. So I think it's become situational ethics, and the lack. I think it's also deterioration of the education system, and also a change in demographics. This is not the same country as it was just 20 years ago demographically. And we've had a huge influx in terms of demographics of people that believe the government should take care of them. They come from predominantly socialist, a socialist philosophy. And I don't see there's a lot of honor over there when you figure it's okay for somebody else to take care of me because they have more. Just because somebody's been successful. And this is the problem in American society today, is we have about 45 to 46% of people that are mooches and leeches and underachievers by design. I've always said, if you have problems in your life, look in the mirror for the problem first. That's where you should look first. You don't look at your neighbor, you don't look at somebody else. But we now have a large degree of people that think because they didn't cut it, because of life choices they've made, which is another thing that I've told my sons, starting when they're about 16, the choices they make at an early age will be like that ripple in the pond. It'll come back and get you when you're 25 or 30 or even 40, because it sets a trend. But we have a situation where, people are quite fine that, to let others carry them, and will rationalize it and normalize it. I mean, we've seen this in the student loan debate. The people that are advocating for this, somebody else to pay somebody else's loans, they can't even defend it on the merits. They cannot give a rational and logical argument as to why somebody else who had a loan and paid it, or their parents paid it for them, should have to pay that one off too. Sorry. It's an overall, what I consider an overall decline in the social and cultural standing in the West. It's not just here.
And Dooovid, have you noticed Gentile notions of honor, and any reflections on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's situational. Like I mentioned, God forbid when I ran away when I was a kid, that that was maybe even the 80s, but there's still a lot of honor in different situations, like engineering, employment, doing a good job, keeping your word. But a lot of those values have switched, and if it's situational, it's hard to be a man of honor. And you could be a good friend. Like you was thinking, like, okay, club culture, you're going to be a good friend by backing up your friend's lie. He's trying to get the girl, and he's lying, representing himself a way that is clearly not true, and you back them up in it because you're trying to help them succeed. And Orthodox Jews in the business world or something like that, you say, well, it's not, it's situationally honorable, or like in the hero way. Well, he's a hero to me. He was good to me, even if he was unhonorable. But there is some, even African Americans in the business world that value honesty, value a hard day's work, doing their job, keeping their word. Although it's probably decreasing. I think I mentioned like my father's, I don't know how many generations back, saying like, God forbid, I'm not leaving you anything except a good name. You don't have a big inheritance coming to you, but I'll leave you a good name, and be the type thing, an honest man who kept his word. And so that older school American, maybe rural, small town element is definitely on the decline.
Rodney, are there any things that you've noticed about promiscuous men, or for that matter, promiscuous women, but promiscuous men, it's more subtle? Do you see it?
I don't think so at all.
What do you see?
I don't think so at all.
What do you see?
I think that both, if you have a male or a female is promiscuous, nowadays at least they wear it with pride. When I was in high school and college, it was kind of weird. You kind of knew who was and who wasn't, but they didn't run around bragging about it, and it wasn't rewarded by society, i.e., don't slut shame. I happen to think that slut shaming is a good thing if you want to preserve your family. So I think that it all goes with the times and how things have devolved. Who was it? Don Wills in the chat said I was dispensing dad advice where the kids have their fingers in their ears scrolling on their phones. I only give dad advice to my kids. I don't even tend to give advice to other people's kids, and I can tell you, none of my daughters have been knocked up out of wedlock. My sons have not been accused of knocking any women up and haven't had any women come at the doors saying this is your child. My oldest son's married, has 2 children, and a third one on the way. My middle daughter is getting married. She's not knocked up. So, by any measure, I'm pretty happy with how my kids have turned out. We don't agree on everything. Sometimes they troll me. Sometimes they're pissed off. But I don't give dad advice to anybody. That's just what advice I've given my family, because every family is different. Every family is different. The dynamics people may think they know. You may think you know your neighbors, but you have no idea what goes on behind those 4 walls. I learned that in the legal profession. You start looking at complaints, domestic violence issues, and things of that nature, child molestation. You just don't know. And there was one other comment. I talked about how small town America will forgive a drug dealer before they'll forgive somebody running a brothel. I don't think that's true at all. I think in small town America, particularly now, particularly with fentanyl, all of that, I think there's kind of been a change. In Mexico, this is one of my problems with immigration. In Mexico, they build Catholic monuments with candles and all that to narco terrorists, to drug dealers. It's in the culture. I don't know why they do it, but they do it. I have family members that are befuddled, by it, don't understand why that it's done. But it's when you import a people from another society or another culture, you're also importing those values. So I don't think that in every society, or say every demographic or every culture, that the drug dealer is rapidly forgiven. I know that in some areas that's probably true, and because the drug dealer actually, probably some of those drug dealers in Mexico do more social welfare program, and buying off people than the Mexican government. But I think it's been my experience that if the overall community knows that you ran a brothel and knows you were selling dope, you're not going to go very far socially in that society. You definitely won't. I know in the Jewish community, and unless you're Meyer Lansky, and you won't go do very well, say in some of the other say the Bible Belt, for instance. In the bigger cities, the country is split into 2. We have 2 parallel societies and cultures going on that I don't know how you're going to make them reconcile and get along. They are so fundamentally different.
Well, I would say it's situational, and there's many divides. So, like in urban areas, like you said, Orthodox Jew, that would say, well, I just don't go to bars or clubs. It doesn't interest me. And even seeing like on the inside, like it's loud, it smells bad, people are drunk. I can't even imagine why you would want to go into that place versus the people that like go to bars. That's what they do.
Yeah.
And so if it's promiscuity, that if you're in an urban culture and you go to bars, and there's somewhat of an upside, like in Manhattan, you could meet millionaires and famous people. Besides for promiscuity, like you're living in Manhattan, that's what's on every street corner, bars and clubs. And it's not just like you're going there for promiscuity. There's also like, you want business connections. You want to meet famous people and it's the nature of how it's done in the bars over alcohol and dancing. And so if you want to acquire those skills, you got to learn how to dance, and the music and alcohol and all the the cultural norms of that type culture, versus you saying like no, I'm an Orthodox Jew, like I just don't have any interest of what's happening on the other side of those walls. Put it all in the realm of degeneracy, like just like it's unbecoming. I would never go to one of those places, and if someone saw me at one of those places, it would hurt my reputation. So I came back to Detroit I don't go to bars, but I mean there is some advantage. Okay, like you meet women at bars, but you could also meet millionaires and business contacts and famous people, and various things that So it's one of many cultural divides, and I don't think that's just urban. I mean, even small towns have bars. So like even rural areas, you're going to have an element that they have bars and dancing, and you're going to have you like Mormons who never had alcohol once in their life, or church people who don't go to bars. But I'm pretty sure most small towns also have bars.
And
Luke,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Luke.
Go ahead,
I found
Rodney.
out Mormons do dance. My daughter-in-law explained that when Mormons have dances, the rule is 2 books of Mormons between, if they're unmarried, between the date. And so Mormons do have dances. I found that out. But, I was going to use an example, Luke. I don't think, remember Goldstein, who started and ran Screw magazine for years and years, Jewish, and Larry Flint. I don't think that Goldstein was widely embraced in the overall Jewish community any more than Larry Flint, or even Hugh Hefner, say in the Gentile community. They had their own little small group, fan club, in certain areas and in certain regions. But I don't think that there's an example of people, forgiving and forgetting. I just don't think that either one of them in their respective, among the respective peoples, were widely embraced, and maybe for a few years by teenagers who hid the books under the mattress. But I just don't, I just don't think that I don't think this type of behavior is widely embraced beyond certain regions, certain areas, and among certain, shall we say, I don't even say demographics, populations. I mean, I think this highlights the divide in the West and in the United States. Germany, it's very pronounced. Northern Germany and Western Germany versus Southern Germany and Eastern Germany are fundamentally different in terms of the culture of these types of issues.
And
rejecting that every town has like an entertainment district with bars,
sure,
even strip clubs. I mean, if it's a town of 10,000 people, there's probably an entertainment district with a few bars. And maybe 50%, 70% of the population never goes to the bars, but there's a certain element that human nature, just like homosexuals, even small towns have homosexuals, but things like bars, promiscuity, prostitution, even strip clubs, these are universal aspects of negative of human nature and exist to a certain extent everywhere.
But at the same time, Dooovid, there are counties still in the South and even in Missouri that are dry counties and no alcohol sales on Sunday. And if you want to buy booze, in those areas, you go to the county line, and right across the county line, there's a little dive bar that sells, that you can drink at or take it out in a brown paper bag.
And Dooovid, have you noticed any differences, any different traits or demeanors between people who are promiscuous and people who aren't?
I'd like to answer that too.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably like a high level of extroversion, although you can't have introversions that have techniques of being promiscuous. That people that are introverts and came up with techniques that somehow became successful despite introversion, or teaming up. So there's a lot of teams of dating type teams. You work in teams. That could include, rich people with poor people, better looking people with uglier people, a combination of skills. But, it's probably one would be extreme extroversion, and but I think it's wide enough in society that there's going to be that subset of promiscuity is going to appear across a huge wide set type of people. You're going to have even ugly people, rich people, poor people, extroverts, introverts, athletic people, non-athletic people. I think that it's just so spread across society that you're not going to have like a small subset of character traits that are dominant besides extroversion.
Rodney, you wanted to tackle that question?
Yeah, impulse control. it's been my experience that, people that you just know and they admit, are extremely that way. It all goes around impulse control, which to me drives how you're going to live your life. If you lack impulse control, you're going to have problems downstream. So if you lack impulse control when it turns to sexuality, you're going to have problems with debt. And it's been my experience, believe it or not, Luke, I know 3 people from back when I was in high school 30 years ago. And it's amazing. They were like that. Now, whether they had as many conquests as they claimed, but let's just take them at their word. It might be true, but they lacked impulse control and discipline, and they're literally the same person at 50 that they were at 18 and 19. And it just seems to me that that's what, when we talk about promiscuity, it all goes back to impulse control and ultimately IQ as well. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Okay.
I would definitely disagree. I mean, because you're going to see there's levels of, I mean, if you're talking like the high school, jock, but I mean, if you're in Manhattan or LA and people who are into dating culture, even into their later ages that, don't build up a marriage, or they'll probably have to be successfully promiscuous, high levels of impulse control, to maintain that into their adulthood and even IQ. Like at a certain point, if it's like the high school jock, that if you're going to maintain that lifestyle into your older age, it's going to actually select for higher IQ, and because it's an expensive lifestyle. Networks of people. You might need to successfully lie and tell different stories to different people, and to be able to keep all of that in your head. So if you're talking like, the guy from your high school, but if you're talking like, a player, a Jewish player in, Manhattan or LA, I think it'd be the opposite. It's going to select for a certain amount of impulse control and IQ. I mean, would you see that, Luke?
I'm not sure.
Counter that.
Go ahead, Rodney.
On the jock issue, we just saw a big headline. What is it? The relief kicker for the Buffalo Bills used to go to San Diego.
The punter, yeah.
A couple of my kids live there. The punter. That's right, the punter. There's an example where if all of the allegations are true, and even if they're not true, something that led to, the fact that he had an impulse control problem. He was someplace, he had a bright future ahead of him. He knew it. He knew that he had a bright future ahead of himself, and yet he was still lacked the impulse control to extricate himself from situations and places that really he should not have been. That's my point about this. This punter that was on the line to be drafted and make millions of dollars down the road. You would think someone with a little more impulse control would have the sense to say, this is not where I should be, and being around a drunken female that could make allegations is not where I should be. And I'm a firm believer, by the way, as parental advice, I've always told my daughter, don't drink. It's just not the same for a man as it is for a woman.
Yeah, I mean, that's like, okay, a drastic story, and, even like rape.
There's a lot of them, Dooovid.
But it's like people that develop game, even you're thinking like, Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, or lower levels that you have some sort of game that obviously they lack impulse control, that they're promiscuous or can't control their sexual urges, but they probably at the same time have extreme impulse control, that they have to develop a game and strategy and act according to it. So if you're just talking like a jock, that but if you're in, you
made your point, David.
Culture, you have to develop a game.
Yeah.
You have to have high levels of intelligence. You have to have like networks. Like I said, you might have to keep your story straight, telling a whole bunch of different things to different people, and so it does require, I party from, I knew people that were successfully promiscuous, and a lot of them were smart and had high levels of impulse control. That's how they were successful at it.
Okay.
Well, my final point on that, Luke, is the problem with those 2 examples of Epstein and Weinstein and a lot of others is a lot of times they don't make it. and most of the time they don't make it because their lack of impulse control undermines them. Epstein died in a jail cell, and I don't believe he killed himself. And Harvey Weinstein has lost probably all of his wealth and is rotting away as a sick old man in prison because of a lack of impulse control. And that's my point, is a lot of people that have this issue with being promiscuous, that overrides. I mean, if we are to believe all the stories about Weinstein, he doesn't zip his pants behind the curtain at the Academy Awards if this is all true. And I don't have any reason to believe it's probably not true.
And these guys were criminals.
Say the same thing.
I mean, say that you're okay, these people fell into criminality behavior, but saying of
absolutely, it escalated. The problem escalated because they were rich
New York and LA culture. That you presumably there's people within the bounds of the law that work, that get up in the morning, maintain professional jobs, and do the nightlife culture and exhibit high levels of impulse control and intelligence to be successful at it. Like, so if Weinstein was a weird looking guy, he had to develop these schemes and games to successfully did it. And like it required, like God forbid, he had relations with some of the most beautiful women in Hollywood, and he had to, develop these genius schemes and tactics to do it.
Okay. I think we've done that to death. Let's go around final words, because I'm going to close off the show. Rodney, any final words for this evening?
No, I think we just need to watch. I think we're going to see some very tumultuous times probably between now and November, and the midterms are going to be rather interesting, because I think we're seeing the same type of push polling that we did in 2016 in an attempt to create some Democratic momentum. And I think that probably I still think that the Democrats lose the House and Senate.
Okay, and Dooovid, any final words for this evening?
Yeah, if you want to try again, maybe, there's a lot of interesting psychological things or, realizations. I mean, I think regarding, your topic of religious sex versus secular sex, that it's a lifelong commitment, so you're religious, you're saying that's not the type behavior I'm going to partake in. And, if Luke, you chose Orthodox Judaism and still struggled with it, and there are Orthodox Jews that struggle, but generally you're Orthodox Jew, it's it's a lifelong commitment, and you're just not going to be able to partake in that type behavior. But, certainly, Manhattan, LA, it's a common, it's probably the majority lifestyle where, there's not a high value that they think, the Orthodox Jew is the weirdo. So, like in New York and, probably LA, like God forbid, I saw that, Destiny Nick Fuentes, interview, and, Melania, like asking Nick Fuentes about his virginity. So I think, generally probably LA and New York, Orthodox Jews are more like the outcast. Like, it's unbelievable. Like, you can't be serious that, that you think this behavior is wrong. And that's why I said it's somewhat identity formation. That's like, no, I mean, like, it's me against the world. And I appreciate that that's, animal impulses, and most people can't control their impulse to that extent, though they still probably have high levels of intelligence in how they, could be exerted and how they go about it. But that's what differentiates. Like, I'm an Orthodox Jew, I would just never, behave that way, and it's part of a strong identity formation.
Okay, guys, we'll continue another night. Thank you, and bye-bye.